Everyone, and welcome to the PatternFly demo for September 18th, 2018. We have a few items to get through, so let's go ahead and get started with our PatternFly 4 updates. We're going to start with interaction design, and Matt and Stacy will kick us off with design documents for dropdown and modal. Is Matt or Stacy here?
Looks like Matt has not joined yet.
Okay, so we can skip over the visuals and start off with Michael.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to be showing the new empty state design. And it looks like this. It's very similar to the current empty state design. Got four parts: the icon, the header, the description text, and then the buttons. And we're doing a primary button, and then instead of a secondary button, we're going with link text because we just thought it looked a little bit more appropriate and more of a visual choice. Here's a more industry relevant example. Don't have any API keys, generate key button. So one thing that's different about this implementation, or at least this version of the empty state, is that we want to kind of push the users to choose an icon that's relevant to the content that is missing. So in this case, you can see it's a key because there's no API keys. We definitely still want to offer a default because there's not always going to be an icon that works. But if there is one, we'd like to recommend that they use it. Just looks and feels a little bit more interesting and kind of fun. So here's an example of the empty state in a list view. If you just were to join or jump in this page with this empty list view, like the current empty state, it should be able to fit in really anything that's void of content, I guess. So here's an example of cards. And this is a good example, again, even though these are not very industry specific, but it's showcasing the different icons that should be used or could be used today. So the other thing about the empty state that is kind of an update from the previous version is we want to stress the kind of modularity of it and the flexibility of it. So we're not going to say that you always have to have description text or you even always have to have an icon. We're going to recommend that people use the amount of content that's appropriate for the space that it's within and for, whatever they really have to say. So here you can see three different kind of tiers of content amounts. So yeah, again, just kind of stressing flexibility and modularity with the empty state design. And here's just an example of cards with like probably the most bare bones layout, literally just a header and a button, but it's still technically an empty state. And that's it. That's all I got. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. No, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Matt. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. And next up is Kyle.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the wizard. Okay. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but this is the wizard for PatternFly 4. So one thing that's important to understand before I start is that there is two different types of wizards. There's one with a finite number of steps and one with an indeterminate number of steps. We didn't differentiate any of this for PatternFly 3, but basically what I'm saying is that there is one where we know exactly how many steps from the beginning to the end, and then there's one where you could take several paths, and we need to account for both of these. So we're going to talk about the wizard with the finite number of steps. So this is going to be familiar interaction. So you can see here the layout with the title, the band across the center, which is going to have your number of steps, as well as the content below. One of the things that's a little different about this is, yes, it's in the modal, but what's different is in the content area, we could potentially put whatever type of content you want. So I'm going to show a little bit of that, but you could, right here, I'm showing a 2-column form. You could have paragraphs, whatever you like. So this is pretty open and flexible, and we can change the size of it. And also we could add things like interactions. So I have an example of what that could look like here. So I added this subtle animation to when you're changing steps, and it kind of makes it feel alive. But there's a lot of different places we could do this. But I just wanted to show a demonstration so you could see really the animation shows you which step you're on, and you don't always need a really heavy visual indicator because you've seen the motion to show you where you're at.
It didn't actually come through on my blue jeans anyways.
Great. All right.
And
Well,
the
maybe I can
animation.
send out a video to that later.
Yeah,
Can you see
that'd be
my
awesome.
regular presentation?
Yep.
Okay. So this. Okay, so here we're showing in that bar below a configuration, and then below that you can see it says pending. So we can have a status for each one of these. So you can see it says complete, pending, and incomplete. We could have one that says that this step is required, or that it's, like I said, an incomplete, or we could show whatever we want. So we have an affordance to have status included with the title. And then, of course, we can stack things and change the size of that bar if we have to. But another thing to add is this is 30% larger than the other, the last PatternFly 3. It may look smaller, but it's actually much, much larger. One other thing is we can have several steps. So you can see here that there's 1 to 5. Now we have 5 more steps that you can't actually see here, but we can use the arrow to scroll over to see the additional steps. So I basically took the interaction that Michael had created for the tabs and used that same exact interaction here, so we can be consistent throughout the library. So here we've clicked the arrow, you're seeing the additional steps. This is the mobile state for that wizard. So I took a lot of what we have for navigation and included it here where we could have the thumb scroll for the steps. And then when you scroll up, we could have the header be sticky at the step bar. So you can see the maximum amount of content and it won't be covering up that space when you're scrolling. Oh, and also here we're showing 1 of 10 steps because you can't see all the steps to see how many you have to go from the initial view. Here I'm showing the that finite wizard, but much larger, and then showing how you could expand it out to include other types of content where you have the cards versus having like paragraphs on the left, and then how the button positioning could change depending on what's appropriate for the content that you're showing. So everything is much more flexible, and that's just really limited to the number of layouts that we have. Also, we could put it in other types of layouts. So this is a mock-up I did for Insights, where I'm showing a modeless overlay, and we're showing the content inside of that, and it's the same exact content. This is a wizard with an indeterminate number of steps, as I talked about before. You don't know how many steps are going to be right at the beginning, depending on the path that you take. So I took a lot of this from the work that CoreOS did with Quay. I thought it was a great example. So here we're showing 2 columns, and basically you don't know how many steps are going to be, so we don't have that bar. And then you're just going to see at the bottom left that you could continue to step 2. And then here you would get an animation which would show the content moving to the top, and we're going to the next step. And then you can see here that we're on step 2, and you have a scroll bar. So you could just scroll back up to step 1 if you like. So basically you're just building a large, like a form here when you could see the scroll bar. So we could also change the sizing of this however we want, whatever's appropriate to the content we have. The content is so varied for each one of these wizards, we have to make it really flexible. So here you can see that we're on, the next step, and you could just continue to step 3, and it just keeps building, and you get this animation that just keeps showing it moving to the top. And that is, one more thing. What's more important is what this isn't. So this is not a guided workflow, and it's not a getting started screen. A lot of times I would see with PatternFly 3, we've used that wizard for a lot of different interactions that don't necessarily always make sense. So something like this Evernote getting started screen, even if this was a PatternFly version of this, using the wizard wouldn't make sense. So we need separate patterns for getting started in the guided workflow. That is all. Does anybody have any questions about that? Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. This is great. And we're going to jump back up to interaction design with Matt Crono and Stacy.
Okay. Is Stacy on? I don't think she is. I will present both of these then. Let me share my screen out. Okay. So this is so Stacy and I have been working, and Rachel also have been working on starting to write design docs for PatternFly 4. So these are the design documents that will show up on the PatternFly 4 website that are intended to provide design guidance for usage of PatternFly 4 components. So these documents, like the PatternFly 3 design content, will live in the PatternFly design repo. We've set up a new folder for those called PatternFly 4 components, and so there's two documents that were merged in this past sprint. The first one is Dropdown, and see that here. So a couple things I would point out here. One is, unlike the earlier PatternFly 3 documentation, we are consolidating all of the design documentation into a single page, a single design markdown file. So we talk about the elements of a component. In this case, the dropdown consists of a drop-down menu with a title, or a kebab menu, which replaces the drop-down with the kebab, and some text that talks about usage of drop-downs, when to use a drop-down, when not to use a drop-down, and other best practices for using drop-down, and some guidelines for that reflect the content that should be in drop-down menu. This just notes that your menu item should be action-based, since the drop-down is really used to present a list of actions in a compact, space-efficient way. So that was the drop-down, and then for the modal, this documents just the standard basic modal, the elements of the modal, when to use a modal, when not to use a modal, and some guidelines for writing content within the modal, noting things like button labels, guidelines for button labels, etc. So we will be continuing to, as components get completed in the PatternFly 4 repo, be creating these documents in preparation for being able to expose this content on the website. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to ping me or Stacy or Rachel on any of this content. Anybody have any questions? Okay, if not, I'll hand it back to Amy.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing these docs, Matt. So next up is CSS, and Matt Carlton's going to kick us off there.
Hey guys. All right. So I've been working on primarily, well, basically only form stuff. So I actually have a PR open now, and what it covers is a lot of revisions to what we had for forms, mainly because we wanted to introduce left align labels, and because of that, we had to refactor how we were building out forms. So if you look at that PR, you'll see now that we have, instead of a form component, we have a form layout component, and this basically just focuses on things that are delivered through the PFC form component. And so what that's mainly going to focus on is things like layout and labels and action groups and things that are outside of the components that we actually have separate from that. So it kind of allows us in the workspace to focus on other things. For say the form controls, just going to focus on those things, and input group in this PR as well. There was some cleanup for the input group, just doing some tweaking, and there's still going to be some work to be done there as far as how to address info tip popovers, and that's work that's being done. This kind of addresses it, but I think that as Michael Coker does some work on the popovers, we'll see some progress in that area as well. So now actually what we have in our demos for forms is 3 kind of basic demos. So we have a simple form demo, a horizontal form demo that now shows the left align labels, and then the alternative form, which is primarily just for the login screen. So the purpose of these demos is obviously to show like basic forms, and it allows us to start doing some further testing with accessibility. What is still yet to come is some more complex form demos that will have things like tooltips and input groups and different things incorporated into that to allow us to do further testing with custom, components and forms and accessibility stuff. But we're trying to break it out just so we can focus on certain things in this one PR. I think that's pretty much it. I did do some work on the check component as well. You'll notice this has changed a little bit to include a label, and we still have plans for custom checkbox and radio buttons, so this could also turn into individual components that focus on that, but that's yet to be kind of decided. And I think that's pretty much it.
Are there any questions for Matt? Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And next up is Andy.
All right, so I think last time I showed off the login spec here, so the concept, and we had the basic login layout that Andres and I worked on, and how it flowed correctly and be responsive for mobile devices, and that's what that looked like. We noticed that there were a couple of components that were sort of missing from this login demo though, the form area and sort of a grid for these social login buttons, and then in terms of use, help, and privacy policy, making that all on one line. So since then, I introduced the list component, which by default has the same styling as the content component or list within the content component. But with 2 modifiers, you can do either an inline list, which spaces them horizontally, or a grid, which positions them inside of a grid and has the flexibility to do what we need. So, and also Matt has been working on the form component, as you saw, and he mentioned the alternative form demo, which is basically purpose-built for this login layout, this login demo. So here's what it looks like currently. This is kind of a work in progress. There are a few kind of quirks to it. Maybe more modifiers are needed, but responds just as you'd expect, with the form integrated, social login stuff at the bottom, and those links there too. So a few more tweaks, and once the form stuff is, I guess, merged, this will be ready. Any questions about that? Thanks.
Awesome. Looks great. Next is Michael Coker.
Hello. This is a quick demo of a proof of concept that I put together for PatternFly 4 to make a PatternFly 3 styled theme. So basically, you can start with a PatternFly 4 site, HTML, CSS structure, like I have on the screen, and then you can add a class to your body element, for example, to say, I want to style PatternFly 4 to look like PatternFly 3. And that just adds some CSS to the page that basically gives you the look and feel of a PatternFly 3 website. In this demo, I've updated the masthead to match PatternFly 3, as well as the navigation. That's basically it. Any questions?
Awesome. That's really cool. Thanks, Michael. And next we have Christy.
Hi, everyone. A lot of my work this week was focused on making some workspace upgrades just to create consistency. I first I did the alert and badge migration examples. So for alert, we have the PatternFly 3 alert, we have PatternFly 3 toast notifications, and then we show what this looks like combined in PatternFly 4, so with the alert and notification. And then we'll continue to kind of upgrade this workspace to allow users to easily compare these upgrades. And then with the badges, it's pretty simple, PatternFly 3, PatternFly 4. And then other things, I changed the styles on the left side nav, just for like hover and the active and focus states, just to more closely align with what we have in PatternFly 4 and up here as well. And I also pulled in the titles here for the pages rather than just having that static text. And then I also created a consistency, making sure every page is converted to handlebars. So for alert, that was written in HTML. So I went in and wrote that in handlebars, and the same with accessibility and alignment. Yeah, just creating consistency in the workspace.
Awesome. Thanks, Chrissy. Are there any questions for her? All right. React is up next. So I'll be sharing my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
You can see it.
Okay, awesome. So for me, I worked on the PatternFly for React implementation of the avatar component. So for the example, we just have a simple avatar using Cal's lovely photo as an example. And also underneath, we just have the simple props, class name, the source attribute for the image URL, and the alt attribute for the alternative text for the image. And that's it for me. Are there any questions? Okay, and next up for React is Yoakum.
Yes, hi. Let me share my screen. I think it's this one. All right, can you see?
Yes.
All right, cool. So I worked on the implementation for the nav component in PF4 React. You can see the examples here on the right and some code examples on the left. So the nav component is made up of 3 subcomponents, mainly the nav component, which acts as the container and which manages which item is active. And it's also responsible for initializing the correct active item when you navigate in. And I hear a little bit of feedback, by the way. Maybe someone here has it on. Anyway, and then within the nav container, you can have one or more nav lists. And really of note here is mainly the variant property, which can take in the values of default, simple, horizontal, tertiary, and that controls the look and layout of the nav. And if you don't specify it, then by default it is set to default. And within the nav lists, you can have one or more nav list items. And you know, as its children, it can take in any content. But it does require that you set the to property, which sets the target navigation link. Going back up and looking at a few examples, you can see up at the top we have our simple nav. And if you look on the left, that's the corresponding code example. You can see that the variant is set to simple, and the structure should be pretty straightforward. If you look at the group nav, you can see here that it just has two nav lists, with each nav list has a title set, and that automatically tells it that it's a group nav. For default nav, no property for the nav list is set, but you can also specify the variant property to be default if you wanted to. Same result. For the expandable nav, it looks like the group nav. So each nav list has a title, but then it also has the expandable Boolean set to true. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet is that by default, the first item in the list is highlighted by default. And if that list happens to be an expandable list, then the expandable list will be expanded and the first item within it will be highlighted, as you can see right here. And then we have expandable nav with subnav titles, which looks very similar, except it also has an additional property set up here. And you can also have a mixture of non-expandable and expandable lists. And then simply setting the variant property to horizontal will make your list horizontal. And if you set it to tertiary, it'll make it tertiary. And as a bonus thrown in, here's an example of how you could use a React Router, for example, as the children nodes for each nav list item. Also, all of these lists are right now they're tabbable. So if I go in here into the expandable navs area, I use the tab key. I can tab into each child item. If I hit the enter key, it'll select that child item. If I hit the enter key on the group header, it'll expand or collapse it. And that's it. Any questions?
Say when you expand the expandable version, that you highlight the first nav item by default. Did I get that right?
Yes.
But so the focus is still on the original link.
Oh, I see. So when you so right now link 2 is expanded, and the subnav link 2 item is active, which is also being reflected in the link 2 group header. So if I wanted to go into link 1 and expand that out, it's not being marked as active until you have a child item highlighted, and then the group active style kicks in.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And also, if you collapse that group, you can still see that it's marked as active, so the user will know that there's something in there that's being highlighted.
Awesome. Are there any more questions for Joachim? Okay, sweet. Thanks for sharing this. This is really cool. And next up is Titani. Are you speaking to Tani? I think you're on mute. Yeah, I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear?
Nope. No.
She's gonna fix her microphone right now.
Okay.
Recording.
I could hear you, I think, from someone else's speaker.
Do you want to come back? Is there another demo?
I think hers is the last one.
I think here comes bringing his computer.
Sweet.
And you just start talking through my laptop here. Yeah, I can just put it right here.
Okay, great idea.
I think you can just talk and they should hear you.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Sorry. So this iteration I worked on reorganizing the documentation in the PatternFly React repo. So it was kind of difficult to find what you needed in the React repo. So on the right here is what we had before, and on the left is how I reorganized. So now I have some links for getting started for PatternFly 3 and PatternFly 4. So that's for consumers. If I click on the link, it will take me to getting started for PatternFly 4. PatternFly 3 specific. And you click on the link for PatternFly 4. And notice I removed some of this PatternFly 3 specific. Sorry, I keep getting feedback because I'm talking to someone else. I removed the PatternFly 3 specific content and moved it into the PatternFly 3 readme. And then for contributors, I add the link. It was difficult to find the contributor guide. So now if you click on the link, it'll take you to the contributor guide. And there's PatternFly 3 and 4 specific content within here. But I did get some feedback that maybe it'll be better to split it up. So when you come into the contribution guide, you can either go to PatternFly 3 or PatternFly 4 specific content. So I'm going to work on that. And then I also added a link to the getting started within here. But the getting started information that's kind of complementary to the contribution guide was part of the wiki. And I brought that under source control and added a README for that so that I could link it. That's pretty much it.
Are there any questions for Tani? Awesome. Thanks for doing this, Tani. It looks really good. And so there aren't any accessibility or PatternFly 3 updates today. So that's about it. Thank you everyone for all of your work and for joining us. I'll be sending out a recording shortly after this, but if anyone has any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out. And I hope to see you all for next demo. Thanks everyone. Bye.